Welcome everybody. This is the presentation that I put together for the Wilmington Neighborhood Council on the Wilmington Waterfront redevelopment. And I got a lot of requests after the presentation to see it, so I decided to make the video. And just a little bit about myself before I start. I married into the Wilmington community about 25 years ago. And my wife's name's Laura Rubio. She was Wisteria Queen 1981. She's daughter of John and Ann Rubio. And we got married at Harbor Christian Center in 1992. We moved around the country for about 20 years, returned in 2013. We wanted to be near family and help make a difference in the community. I've been involved with many projects on Avalon, improvement projects, thinking very deeply about what should be there and how we can make the community better. And I've met with the Harbor Commissioners, the Director of Real Estate for the Port, the Neighborhood Council, many different community leaders, done extensive research on the Waterfront project since its inception. And a little bit more about my background. Worked in industrial design, which is the degree of creative problem solving for business. I currently run a $300 million wealth management firm in El Segundo. I'm not a real estate developer, but I've learned a lot from them as we've invested with them over the last 10 to 15 years. And learned a lot from investing in hotels and apartments, restaurants. So I have some things to offer to the process, but mostly from my design background, learning about how to take many different inputs from different stakeholders and work them towards a design criteria and a workable business solution. So let's jump in. Enough about me. Let's go through the project overview in its current state. And first, a little history. This part of the waterfront you're familiar with. It's the Waterfront Park, opened in 2011. This part over here is what has been worked on over the past several years, and the design is now finalized. It's called the Wilmington Waterfront Promenade, and that was in 2015. Then this is the area that I'm going to be talking about specifically today, and that's on the Avalon Promenade and Gateway. And then in the future, what they're planning on is doing commercial development up in this area. The orange squares, rectangles, are what the port currently owns and is preparing to sell. So the first thing that I suggest is just getting rid of all these fancy names and just calling this whole area Banning's Landing, and calling this area, I'm going to refer to it as the entry area, and this is the waterfront, just to simplify everything. And many people don't know the current state of the project, so I think it makes sense to spend a little bit of time showing you what is planned so you can compare that to what I'm recommending. And I'll walk you through that. So I've turned the map to the side, so we've got Harry Bridges here, and then moving towards the waterfront going this way, with the railroad tracks cutting across this way. So the sort of center point here is the entry plaza, and they're through an input process that they went through, showed a few different variety of choices, but they ended up concluding that a sundial would be the way to go. And then this is a promenade that circles around through here and then goes over the train tracks on an arch bridge. And then in the middle is the Wilmington History Walk that runs through the center here. So this is the type of thing where you have stamped into the walkway significant periods of the town's history and dates and so forth going up this way. Then those two come together, and then you can get over and walk into the waterfront. Also through here, they've got a sports court here. And then the commercial opportunity, it was just announced that that's going to be a work training center. And then they're not sure what's going to go here, but there's room for something here. There's an educational sort of area here, lots of open space, lawn, and some native plants planned, a couple of parking lots, a roundabout. And then what you can't see here is the part of the design that's already completed. That's where the Banning's Community Center is, and there's going to be a great lawn for just flexible space for outdoor events and so forth. And then there's going to be a youth sailing center, and there's going to be room for a restaurant at the front there. So that's generally what they have planned at this point. And what I'm going to do is go through and show you first a little bit of research that I've done on destinations of this sort and what is successful. And the first thing that is very distinctive and makes things successful is being authentically different. Having soul or characters gives you a bonus. What I've seen in the current plan is it looks like a beautiful park, and it's going to be a tremendous improvement to the industrial blight that we currently have. But it really is just missing the extraordinary opportunity that we have to make a wonderful destination that it could be more than just a passive place, but really stimulate future development. So there should be something for children, something for adults, and then it follows this formula of see something, do something, and learn something. And an example of this would be the Griffith Observatory, which is a place that you go to learn, see, and do things. But primarily it's a gathering place and essentially a fairly simple place, but very different. It's unique. There's not very many observatories. It's certainly authentic in that sense, something for children, something adults. You can definitely see something, you can do something, you can learn something. It's really a learning type of attraction, a significant cultural type of attraction. So the overview, I'm going to go through the historical significance, the entertaining qualities of the site itself, then go through specific recommendations. I call that part one, that's within the current scope. And then part two will be some sharing of ideas for a grander vision that could really put it on that same level as the Griffith Observatory. So first we start with going way back to February 1854 when our town was first envisioned by Phineas Banning and his partners. It was first mentioned in the Los Angeles Star in that February 1854 edition. And even at that time, he and his partners saw the Transcontinental Railroad coming, and they knew that it was the opportunity to prepare for that. But his critics and competitors mocked him and called it Goose Town. And my suggestion is that we should embrace that nickname and create a mascot. Here I've got one that I call Finny the Goose. And he's displaying a nice neck tattoo in classic Norman Rockwell form, showing the history of the town, Goose Town first, and then Wilmington to follow. We'd have to squeeze in there New San Pedro in between those two lines. So next we have Banning's Landing, which if you think of it, we know that Phineas is the undisputed father of the harbor. And with that then, Banning's Landing becomes the birthplace of America's port. And that first landing happened on September 25th, 1858. And that makes it an extremely significant place. I would say nationally significant because America's port is absolutely nationally significant and known worldwide. Beyond that, we go to, first let's go to a picture of that the early days and not too far from Banning's Landing. This was the Wilmington Exchange building in 1865. And it began with coaches before the trains came. And then here is the first railroad in Southern California. And we've seen the pictures, maybe you know some of the story. This is the San Gabriel. And what people don't realize is this wasn't on a track going someplace through Wilmington. This was actually on Banning's Landing. So Banning's Landing was the site of the first railroad in Southern California, and that is extremely significant and I think interesting to many people. So beyond that, and in preparation for the Transcontinental Railroad was that first site of the first railroad in Southern California. But that enabled us to become the southern terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. And so we helped fulfill the manifest destiny. This is a picture of Banning's Landing Wharf in 1870. And that led to this becoming a reality. So this was, it's actually a recreation of the scene, but this was in 1869, thereabouts, and it was at Lang Station, was the Golden Spike ceremony. And you can see this gentleman in the middle, he's holding a hammer, and on the end of it is a hammer made of silver on an orange wood handle, and he's pounding in the golden spike. This was a very significant event at the time. It was considered the marriage between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and Phineas Banning was invited to speak. He was there. He was a distinguished guest and speaker, and it was an event that people billed as the sort of birthing of the two cities, making them great in being able to open their doors to commerce and recreation. Then next came the Civil War in 1861, and we've all seen this picture. However, many people think it was taken at the drum barracks, but it was not. It was taken at the government supply depot, which was at Banning's Landing. And this was the only known photo of a camel in the U.S. military, which is clearly extremely significant. Then came more of the entertaining quality. So the first parts were very significant, both nationally and state and local history. But then came the recreational activities at Banning's Landing. This was the Amelia, which was the first steamship that Phineas brought in to Banning's Landing and used to take people on excursions to Catalina. Then came in 1914 the parade that you probably have heard of. Charlie Chaplin shot a movie on Avalon. In fact, it was mostly shot at Banning's Landing, and it was a very short. I wouldn't call it a film. It was a short, and it wasn't particularly good, but a lot of the scene did occur at Banning's Landing, and that is significant and certainly entertaining. And then that led to his stepbrother, Sid Chaplin, starting an airline at Banning's Landing. Could do a lot with this in terms of display. Very interesting to look at and hear the stories. Then came William Wrigley Jr. in 1919. He bought Catalina for the purpose of creating the training camp for the Chicago Cubs. He created the Catalina Terminal, and he then and his son created the Wilmington Catalina Airline. And there's way too much to go through here. I mean, there's so many photos and stories, families and celebrities, and it's. I mean, every coach, every train, boat, every plane had a story, and there's so much there that we could do with. And this isn't all to just give you a history lesson. I'm going into this because I think there's just tremendous economic value that can be had from all this history for our community. Here's a picture of the Catalina Airline, one of the early planes. Then in the Roaring '20s, the Yacht Club was the playground for the rich and famous, and we also had some residents that were members I'll get into in just a moment. But not only was it just spectacular, it had tremendous history of the who's who of LA during the Roaring '20s here, but the architect was also very significant. He went on to design the Pentagon after this structure. Another movie was made at Banning's Landing. This was Buster Keaton driving down Pier A Street and actually getting ready to jump out of the moving car, as it went into Banning's Landing. And Buster, if you're not familiar with him, he is probably, according to Roger Ebert, one of the best actor-directors of all time. He had an incredible run in the 1920s. And this is a really good movie. You would enjoy it, and quite a bit of it does take place at Banning's Landing on a boat and then going out into the ocean. It's a great movie. You should see it. Next came the 1932 Olympics. And back to that yacht club. So our yacht club, the Wilmington Yacht Club, was significant in bringing the Olympics to Los Angeles. In fact, one of our residents, Paul Hiller, was on the Olympic committee, and he was a Marine dealer that lived in Wilmington and on that committee, part of the yacht club. And they brought it to Los Angeles, and we had a team. So our yacht club team, these young men sailed in the Olympics here, and they won the first Olympic medal in sailing for the United States. And that is really significant, very interesting. And the young man in the middle was Owen Churchill. He's again pictured down here on the boat, the Angelita. And Owen went on to compete in the 1936 Olympics, and he also went on to invent the swimming fins and became very wealthy from that and became a lifelong supporter of sailing. So that boat, the Angelita, which is pictured here, became immortalized. And what I mean by that, if you're not familiar with sailing, is boats, when they have done something significant, create quite a following. And this boat was actually found in a garage in 1982, and it was in harsh condition. And it was then the significance was realized, and it was completely restored. And Peter Uberoth, who was the commissioner of the 1984 Olympics, bought the boat, and then it still races today. It has successive owners, and it's used in races around the country. There's lots of photos. There's miniatures made of it. It could be just a really beautiful display. Here's the gold medals. And then the story just keeps going on and on and on. And I can't go that deep into it, but the team that built the boat was the Wilmington Boat Works, which is just a few hundred feet from Banning's Landing. And not only did they make this boat, they made boats for John Paul Getty and William Randolph Hearst, as well as boats that were made in used in movies, and boats for the military, and it just goes on and on. There's a whole fan base around the Wilmington Boat Works. Pretty incredible. And then next is during World War II, Banning's Landing was the port of embarkation. There was about 200,000 soldiers that were moved through our shores, and the stories and photos are endless, and everything that was involved with World War II. Also during World War II, the yacht club at that time became a base for the U.S. Coast Guard, which is extremely admirable, but also very sad, because then when it was returned, it was not in great shape, and the members had all fled to other yacht clubs, so then it was torn down shortly thereafter. But the point there is that Banning's Landing has always been there for our U.S. military when it was needed in the Civil War, in World War II, and even in World War I. It's always been there for the U.S. government. So I conclude that, and I didn't start here. I didn't know what I would find when I started digging into the history of it. I knew, the name, but that was about it. But the more I dig, the more I find, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just over, a couple-month period, more recently that I've looked into it. But it definitely, I hope you get the point that all of this should be the central part of the development. There's so much to work with here. It just seems obvious once you see all this that this should be the attraction. This would get people to come here and tell their friends about it. And in fact, it really just begs for having a major exhibit like an America's Port, where it's not just what I've showed you, but also everything that the port does, and the whole history of longshoremen, and just the immense richness, but doing it in a very interactive way to make it more engaging, not just a static museum. So pursuing a National Historical Park designation sure seems to make sense. The people forget that the Banning Mansion and the Drum Barracks, which are both recognized on a state level at least, those didn't happen before Banning's Landing. They are here because of Banning's Landing. So Banning's Landing is actually more significant than either of those two. Banning's Landing made those two possible. It just isn't recognized as such, and it hasn't been elevated to that status yet. But that's what we're going to do. So then it just flows from that theme. Once you have that theme, then your landscaping, your material selection, your colors, your architectural features, artwork, they should all follow that historic to modern port theme. So then getting into more specific recommendations that are within the current scope. So first sticking to that current footprint. So I'm going to first take you through like a story of how someone might hear about a development at Banning's Landing from a friend on Facebook. They've never even heard of Wilmington. I find that to be the case when I talk to a lot of people all over LA. And we've actually already created a website. I'm helping form an organization called the Wilmington Visitors Bureau. We've already created a very, very deep website. It's not live yet, but it has immense amount of beautiful photos, things to see and do, where to go to eat and drink, where to stay, calendar of events. It's all in there. It's, I don't know, probably 100-page deep website. And someone would come here, they'd go to things to see and do. They would find Banning's Landing. They would see these wonderful stories and pictures. They'd be excited to take their family on the weekend, and then they would come to Wilmington. Most likely they'd come down the 110 freeway and they exit at PCH, and maybe there's a parking ride there, and which there is, but maybe there's a trolley there that they can get on, and they start hearing about the story of Wilmington even when they first get onto the trolley and they pass by the Wiener Schnitzel and they hear the story and they want to go back there. And then as they drive back down PCH, they get to PCH and Avalon, and they see this beautiful gateway sign. It's simple. It looks a little bit nautical. Maybe it even looks related to oil in some sort, but mostly nautical, simple. Could be just black and white, so everyone can agree on the design. And we would just add to this Wilmington and historic Avalon Boulevard, and then if the port pays for it, we'd even put a port logo on there, and it would look spectacular. It could be made out of aluminum, and the center section is certainly a separate piece. It could be made so it could be removed for parade, or if we've got a big event or something that's coming down the street, we need more height clearance, that could be detachable. So those would also need to be, they should be at Anaheim and Avalon, Harry Bridges and Avalon. This shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be part of the budget going into it. So you start attracting people right away. We have a massive resource of just the daily traffic counts going down PCH and going down Anaheim, and we should take advantage of it to help revitalize our community. So now going down Avalon Boulevard, this is us in the trolley, and you stop at the long traffic light at Harry Bridges and Avalon, and you see the gateway sign. So there'd be another one here, and this one would say now Banning's Landing. Maybe you've got a subtitle or something up here like America's Port Exploratorium or something like that. So I'll show you an example of a monument sign, an idea for that here. And then as we're waiting here at this long traffic signal, we start to look into the park, and we see this just glimmering silver seaplane that looks like it's taking off, headed to Catalina out of this fountain. And as we sit here, it just draws us in because it looks so interesting. So we're going to go through here, turn, and we'll turn onto Broad Avenue and get going. But first we see that monument sign. It might look like something like this. We've got Banning's Landing, the port logo, and then a couple of tenants. These are just suggestions, ideas of what would draw people here. Get some use during the day, like a tea house. OHAS hasn't agreed to this, but I love them so much I put them on there as an example. But it would be a cafe and visitor center, and then something like a little working farm. So I just called it Goosetown Lavender Farm with a gallery and gift shop. And then the main attraction, when it would be ready, would be called America's Port Exploratorium, and that would be the sort of the headliner down here. And I've got other examples of, for instance, stonework, making it a little bit more natural. And then using some sort of ranchero but dark. It's casual but also a little bit dressy horse farm fencing. And then a little bit of purple lavender to make it friendly. And the landscaping, thinking more of coastal California. So here we've got some lavender with California poppies, and trying to reduce as much concrete as possible and using more natural stone And now we're back to the park. So we've turned through here. We've gone down Broad Avenue, parked the trolley right here. And as we exit, we're now going to go into the park. And remember where I showed you the sports court on the proposed. So instead of the sports court having active, so it's not a static park, but having an active full-size locomotive that kids can actually climb on. And that's the first thing that we see right here. And next we're going to go through the olive groves over here. I'll show you a picture of that. Then we're going to walk by the tea house right here, the cafe and visitor shop. We'll look at the sculpture, at least a seaplane that sort of inspires that. And then the Working Lavender Farm Gallery and Gift Shop, the Grand Pavilion, and then the America's Port Exploratorium, and a camel to climb on there. And there's also a rendition of a stagecoach. So the first thing is the climb on and in train. So it'd be fantastic if it was the, looks like the actual train that we first had, but short of that, some kind of locomotive that kids can get on, climb on, with an interpretive panel explaining why it's here as the first railroad, transcontinental connection. So until we can have an actual building with an exploratorium, we basically put the exploratorium on the property outside with these types of displays. So this is just a reminder of how, like for instance, they don't put exercise equipment or sports courts in this type of historical type, learning type of destination. Those are fantastic amenities for the community, but they should be at the Waterfront Park, which is immediately adjacent to this. So it makes more of a strong theme. It doesn't confuse the visitor of what is this supposed to be, and making the most out of every part of it we can. So next we're going to go to the, that was the entryway sign. We talked about the train, the olive groves, the tea house, and that's pretty much a repeat. Sorry about that. We're going to go to the olive groves with gravel, and trying to make this look more natural, more indigenous. But then within that, this is the tea house, so creating some cozy areas. And this looks very fancy, but really it's just 6 olive trees with some outdoor furniture. It's got some DG instead of concrete to make it look a little bit warmer, inviting. And then we've got some lighting, and it just creates a really nice ambience and a place where people want to stay and be and spend time as they're enjoying some tea and having some food at the cafe. This is another view of what the architecture might look like for that building. Just a suggestion. It's a way to bring in some dark colors that give some of that soul and character of Wilmington, both from Victorian times, but also more modern times. And then it can be combined with a more modern type of building here. If that works, that could be a way to go. Could also do something like this. Similar sort of colors, looks a little bit more nautical in some of the design aesthetics. Next, we're going to go to the suggestion for the sculpture. So again, in the current proposed, we have a sundial, which is nice, but it's not as meaningful of having something that actually is specific to the site. So the idea is here to take like a McDonnell Douglas dolphin plane and basically make it completely silver, chrome, and mount it so it's standing above a pool of water, and the fountain would be sort of dripping off the bottom of the plane. And I think they can do that in a way that uses as little water as possible. It still looks spectacular. It makes sense to have water close to the waterfront. Something like that, but elevated a little bit off the water. Next is the Working Lavender Farm Gallery and Gift Shop. The idea here is have something that is very unique, that people would drive hours to go out to the desert to see a lavender farm, or people all over the country they're doing that types of thing. They take their children there, older people. I mean, it's for all ages. And it definitely is something different than, like, they don't have this at Redondo Beach. They don't have it at Manhattan Beach. So it's something that would really make our waterfront unique and return it more to nature. And that would really set us apart. So it may look something like this, where it's more of a barn-like structure. The front could look something like this. This is actually in Hawaii, and they have a gallery and gift shop with it. So that is very close to what I think would work really well there. And even in a small space, you can create some beautiful rows of lavender. It can be working. We can't have any fruit produced there, but we certainly could have some beautiful lavender. You can even sell oil that's not produced there, but is bought from other places and then used there. That works perfectly fine too. Next, we're going to go to a grand pavilion. So I'm thinking of this in terms of revenue producing, profit producing businesses that we could attract tenants that work. So right now, Banning's Landing is booked every Saturday of 2018. It's very hard to find a place to have a wedding or a corporate event. And so if you have a place where you've got parking and shelter, and some operations, some support, way to cater it, and so forth, they book up, and it can be a profitable business. So I think between these three businesses, we can have people there on the weekends, and we can have people there even during the week coming down for tea or just visiting and looking around, something that's more than just a park. This is what it might look like. This is a very simple one that's been decorated for a wedding. And then this actually isn't that much more complicated. It's basically a timber barn that's really well lit, and it's been set up for a catering event. This one has doors, so you could close it off to wind and rain, which definitely makes it more appealing, but adds to the cost. But this type of venue could be booked year-round. And you could reserve time for public use so many weekends out of the year or something, but you do want to make sure it's a sustainable business that can be profitable and upkept really well. So with that, and even in small spaces, you can create simple, timeless vignettes. That's all that it takes for a photographer to catch some images. And then we've got some examples of the interpretive panels. So again, until we have a port exploratorium, we could do it outside with panels to tell the story. We could have a stagecoach, climb in, and we could have a camel, like the one we have at the Drum Barracks Park. And then finally, the America's Port Exploratorium, which is beyond the scope of what's currently been presented, but it's my recommendation is to leave space for it and to build it into the plan. And it could, if you had two walkways, you basically could build it over one of the walkways eventually. But we shouldn't be shutting off optionality at this point. If there's a possibility that we can do something like this here, we should start to build it into the plan now, and then at least give us the chance to go out and figure out how to get it funded, because the port doesn't want to run something like this, I don't believe. So if we could find either have it designated as a national historical park, or we could find endowments or something to form an organization and run the Port Exploratorium. And a facade might look something like this. It's at a railroad. Make it look like a railway station. It just makes sense. And until we have that, we could do something like this in the Banning's Landing Community Center or in the Sailing Center. This is a Run the Port exhibit, something that's very interactive and hands-on, that literally hundreds of thousands of people could come to every year and learn about the port, about all the amazing things that happen at our port, all the trains, all the boats, all the planes, all the events and activities. It'd be a fantastic exhibit. And then since it is Banning's Landing, we actually need a ship at port that people can look at. It'd be wonderful if it was a working ship, if they could take tours on it, that all would all be wonderful too. But at least if we had something there that they could look at, so when they're sitting on the new raised bluff and so forth, that they've got something that they can look out at that's beautiful in the evening. So that concludes part 1, which is within the scope of the current development. And beyond that, I'm not going to spend that much time on because it gets to be quite lengthy. But I'll just give you a taste of it. And I call this sort of the act of God version, meaning that let's say that our congresswoman is watching this, or maybe our assemblyman, or our county supervisor, or maybe our mayor, or Rick Caruso, and they say, "Wow, this actually could be something." Then we could make it the equivalent of a Griffith Observatory, even in this industrial waterfront, with all the known limitations and so forth. Well, I'll show you a little bit of it, give you a taste of what could be. So we'd need a little bit wider footprint, so we could have parking. And these are existing businesses, and I don't take that lightly. This would have to be done extremely fairly and ethically. These have been here a long, long time. They're fantastic stories in themselves. But perhaps, maybe, they could be moved and done well in other port properties. If we are able to do that, we open up an immense amount of space, at least visual space, without taking up that much more land. That would really give a great breadth and width to this waterfront, make it look like it's huge, especially if we put in a line of trees along here, and would really open the amount of distance that you could go on a bike or you could walk as you circumvent the entire waterfront. With a little more space, you can do a few more things, especially the like a parking structure down here that would accommodate the amount of people that would be attracted to this type of venue. So I'm going to walk you through this fairly quickly. There's a lot on here, and we'll do a town hall or something and walk people through there. But actually having a terraced amphitheater, putting in a port sky tower, which is in the original plan, but my suggestion is to make it much, much more substantial. Here's the Port Exploratorium. This was an early version of actually using it to bridge over the train railroad tracks. And putting in bridges would enable to keep the roads open. That's pretty much been off the table now for a while. And then here's the lavender farm we just talked about, more extensive paths, the tea house, and the event pavilion, parking structure. The sailing center, which is in the plan, but making it a little bit more grand. And then connecting the waterfronts through an aerial gondola, which sounds like pie in the sky, but I've actually spoken with Doppelmayr, and it's definitely doable. And then a tall ship. So this would actually, we could recreate the wharf, at least a small version of it, and really have an interactive exhibit where they could see a train and see what pre-containerized cargo looked like and really learn about the workings of the early port. Sailing center could be made larger. So the proposed sailing center is about the size of maybe 3/4 of this flat building, but with a pitched roof and a little bit other details, it could really become reminiscent of the original yacht club. The middle here is first the Port Exploratorium. So a few more ideas for what this would look like, and the idea is to create a large space, but do it in a much more economical way, so make it like a very large train shed, using turn of the century, that's the 19th century to 20th century architecture, to create a space that has very high ceilings. Then inside there we would have highly interactive exhibits like they have at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. So you're learning about all the aspects of the port, the history, following that historic to modern port theme. And then I would like to the extent that the longshoremen would like to, include more about what they do, so people can really learn and appreciate the history. And I see, having videos of longshoremen, telling the stories and really building an awareness and appreciation for the work they do. Several of my family members are longshoremen, and people just have no idea what how difficult the work can be and dangerous. Here's an interactive lashing exhibit. I think it'd be fun to have my 11-year-old try to do some lashing. And then again, we would have the port exhibit, and you could have one for adults and children, then also one for toddlers, so they can get hands-on with something that's more their own scale. Along those lines, I learned from several places that I visited that puppet shows bring children in, and they learn stories from them. They learn history from them. So we could have a ongoing puppet show at the Port Exploratorium, or even prior to that at the Bannings Landing Community Center, where we could have Finny the Goose, as long as all the other cast of characters like Lenny the Locomotive and so forth, tell the history of the historic to modern port. The Port Sky Tower, so bringing in a serious tower, that would be the likes of sort of combining the Eiffel Tower with the Space Needle, and giving that late 1800s type of steel girder structure, well lit here, just makes a beautiful industrial look to it. But actually having something that you can charge, you can produce revenue, you can attract people, you can attract events. And here's a look at the Space Needle. Many people aren't aware that there's actually a banquet hall that holds 350 people at 100 feet high, and it is booked as far as the eye can see. Very unique space. The take that we might do on it would be having incorporating brick for the historic, and then steel and glass for the more modern. You could have a view that might be the Catalina view, the Long Beach view, downtown LA view. You can run 3 different events all at the same time. The kitchen's on the same level, restrooms, elevators on that same level. And the space is very minimal. The Space Needle actually occupies 120 by 120 square feet, and then it's 30 feet deep. It's basically a big hole with a bunch of rebar and concrete in it that give it the center of gravity that's just about 10 or 15 feet above the ground, so it can withstand earthquakes and windstorms. And so what I'm asking here is just, people think it's pie in the sky, but just leave 120 by 120 square feet. It's already in the EIR for a tower, and I think we can get a developer that would love to build it. And it's not out of place. It's reminiscent of a lighthouse, and we could really pull in those details of a lighthouse, but more of a historic lighthouse with stone, metal, and glass. And then we can start talking about Avalon, with having that type of exploratorium, a tower there, beautiful grounds and so forth. Then we can have even a boutique hotel on Avalon. And we can have fireworks. And then this is looking at the gondola terminal. These have been done all over the world now. And many places they overpay for them, but they can be done on a much less expensive basis than, for instance, what they did in London, where they overpaid for it. But essentially it's proven the concept that you can build something that moves 2,500 passengers per hour. It's much more efficient than a trolley or a boat. We could actually relieve some of the parking issue in the San Pedro public market by moving people. And if we want a truly world-class waterfront, then we need world-class attractions. And this would actually be a functional attraction that could help move more people in and out of San Pedro And we can build a partnership between our communities instead of a competition, where we can work together to encourage people to stay for more than just an afternoon or more than just a weekend, where they actually come to the Los Angeles waterfront to stay a whole week. Then for Wilmington, this opens the door, and it leads to more development, but historically minded, tasteful development. We can bring in colors, but done in a way that's beautiful, with flowers, nice awnings. We can even recreate the first Wilmington Exchange and create another exhibit for our community. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Port to even giving us our this opportunity to comment. And what is planned is going to be a tremendous improvement. And now, as a community, if we can come together and really take it to that next level and build a world-class destination, a wonderful destination that will stimulate community-wide revitalization. And also thank you to all the individuals in our community, all those people and organizations that have worked so hard on this, going all the way back to the mid-1980s. It's been an enormous effort. So thank you to all of you who have worked on that. And thanks for watching.